and we can label that point C. And last point 3, 0. 3 would be 3 spots to the right. 0 for y value means it stays on the line and doesn't go up or down. And that would be point D and the graph for the section. Title of the last section today is titled Quadrants. If you draw a XY axis graph, and you can label the x-axis the one that goes left and right, and the y-axis is the axis that goes straight up and down or vertical. There are 4 quadrants, or 4 sections of the graph. The top right quadrant is quadrant 1, and we'll use Roman numeral 1 to represent that. Going counterclockwise, the next quadrant in the top left-hand corner is quadrant 2, and we'll use Roman numeral 2 for that quadrant. Continuing around, the bottom left is quadrant 3. And the final quadrant is Roman numeral 4, which is a 1 followed by a B. So again, the top right-hand corner is quadrant 1. Going counterclockwise, we have 2, 3, and 4. For this section, we'll find out which quadrant each point is in. The first point, -2, 3. If you think about the point -2, 3, it is to the left on the x-axis, and it goes up, which will be in quadrant 2. Second point we'll look at is 3, -4. And again, we'll find out which quadrant the point 3, -4 is in. If you think about the point 3 goes to the right, -4 would go down, and that would be in quadrant 4. Continuing on the next point, 4, 2. 4, 2 would have a positive x value and a positive y value, so that would be quadrant 1. And the next point, -6, -2. This point, they're both negatives. If we have a negative x and a negative y, that would be quadrant 3. And the next point, -3, 0. -3 would be on the x-axis to the left. 0y means it's not quadrant 2 or quadrant 3. It's on the x-axis. So the answer to this would be x-axis. Next point, 0, 4. 0 for the x again would be in the middle. 4 would be 4 spots up, but it's not quadrant 2 or quadrant 1. It's on the y-axis, so the answer would be y-axis. And last point we'll look at is 0, 0. 0x would be in the middle, 0y would stay in the middle, and the middle point is called the origin. And that would be the quadrants for graphing a xy axis. Title of the first section today is Graphing and Equation. First equation we'll graph is y equals 2x plus 1. To first graph this equation, we can draw a t-table or xy t-chart. We'll put x on the left side and y on the right side. When graphing an equation, you can use any numbers that you want. The best numbers to use are -1, 0, and 1. So we have one negative number, 0, which will be in the middle, and +1, which will be on the right. To solve for the y values, we'll take the x, plug it into the original equation, and then figure out what y is equal to. If we plug a -1 in for x, 2 times -1, and adding 1 to that, 2 times -1 would be -2, -2 plus 1 would be -1. If we plug a 0 into the equation, 2 times 0 plus 1, 2 times 0 would be 0, plus 1 would be 1. And last point we'll use +1, 2 times 1 plus 1, 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. Once we have the t-table done with our 3 points, we can draw an xy graph to graph this equation. The biggest number we have is 3, so we can go 3 spots in each direction. If you want to, you can label the graph. X is the axis that goes left to right or horizontal. Y would be the axis that goes up and down. Graphing the first point, -1, -1. X would be to the left 1 spot or -1, and Y would go down 1 spot, -1. Second point, 0, 1. 0 for X is in the middle. +1 would be 1 spot up. And last point, 1, 3. X is +1, and Y is 3 spots up. 3 points when graphing these equations. They should be a straight line. All 3 points should line up in a straight line. And that would be the graph for the question. Second equation and last equation for the section is y plus 3x equals -1. This time the equation is not in y equals form. We have x and y on the same side. To graph using a t-table, it's best to get y by itself. So if we have a +3x, we can move that to the other side by subtracting 3x. So y would equal, it's best to put x first, -3x, and the -1 we'll put after. So the same equation, but we'll have y equals -3x minus 1. From here again, you can draw the t-table, xy t-chart. And again, you can use any numbers for x that you want to graph, but the 3 best numbers to use are -1, 0, and +1. Plugging a -1 in for x, we'll have -3 times -1 minus 1. -3 times a -1 is +3. +3 minus 1 would be 2. Plugging a 0 in, -3 times 0 minus 1. -3 times 0 would be 0, minus 1 would be -1. And last point we'll do +1, -3 times +1 minus 1. -3 times 1 would be -3, minus 1 would be -4. Graphing from here, we can draw the xy axis. Again, looking at the biggest number, we have -4, which means we want to go 4 spots in each direction. And if you want to, again, you can label the xy axis. The x-axis goes horizontal, left and right, and the y-axis is vertical, which goes up and down. The first point, -1, 2. x is -1, y is +2. Second point, 0, -1. 0 is in the middle of the graph. -1 would be one spot down. And last point, 1, -4. +1 for x, and -4 would be 4 spots down. And again, all 3 points should line up in a straight line. If they don't, you have to go back, double check your numbers, double check your graphing. But as long as they line up in a straight line, this would be the graph for the question. Title of the last section today is Graphing. Using x and y intercepts. Graphing equations using the intercepts. Intercepts are where it crosses the x-axis and the y-axis. Definitions for the section. The x-intercept. X-intercept will be where y equals 0. And the definition of y-intercept. The y-intercept, x is equal to 0. So for each intercept, the opposite letter is equal to 0. First equational graph is y equals 2x plus 4. Instead of using a t-table to graph this section, we can graph using intercepts by plugging zeros in. The easiest point to plug 0 in is for x. 2 times x, or 2 times 0, plus 4. By plugging a 0 in for x, we can find the y-intercept. 2 times 0 would be 0, and we'll be left with y equals 4. And likewise, we can take the same equation, but this time plug a 0 in for y. So 0 would equal 2x plus 4. Solving this equation for x, we can subtract 4 on both sides. So -4 is equal to 2x. And to solve for x, we can divide by 2. So -2 is equal to x, or the x-intercept is -2. So again, to find the intercepts, you can plug a 0 for x to find the y-intercept, and in the same equation, you can plug a 0 for y to find the x-intercept. Once you have the two intercepts, we can draw the graph. Looking at the two numbers, the bigger number we have is 4, so we can go 4 spots in each direction. And again, you can label the xy axis. The x-axis goes left and right, or horizontally, and the y-axis is vertical, or up and down. First number we had is y equals 4. On the y-axis, if y equals 4, we can go up to 4 and put a point. And this would be the y-intercept, where the line crosses the y-axis. And likewise, if x is -2, we can go to -2 on the x-axis. And this will be where the line crosses the x-axis, or the x-intercept. After you graph both intercepts, you can draw a line through both intercepts, and that would be the graph for the equation. Second equation, and last equation for the section, y equals -3x plus 1. And again, we can graph this using intercepts. The easy intercept to solve for, you can plug a 0 for x, so we can find the y-intercept. -3 times 0 we can cross off, so y would equal 1. Solving for the x-intercept, we can take the same equation, but we'll plug a 0 for the y value. So we have 0 equals negative 3x plus 1. Solving for x, we can subtract 1 on both sides. 0 minus 1 would be negative 1 equals negative 3x. And solving for x, we can divide by negative 3. Negative 1 divided by 3 would be a fraction. Dividing two negatives would become a positive, so we'll have positive 1/3 for the x value. So the y-intercept, y equals 1, and the x-intercept is 1/3. Once you have the two intercepts, you can draw the xy axis graph. Our biggest number is 1, so we can go 1 in each direction. Again, you can label the x-axis and the y-axis. Y equals 1 means the graph crosses at y equals 1. X equals 1/3 means the graph crosses at 1/3. 1/3 would be between 0 and 1, and would be 1/3 of the way between 0 and 1. Once you have the two intercepts again, you can draw a line through both points, and that would be the graph for the equation.